for over 500 years. We've been told the same story, that Christopher Columbus heroically sailed across the ocean and discovered America. But what if that story isn't the truth? What if the real discoverers of America came thousands of years earlier and their stories were buried, forgotten, or erased? In this video, we not just asking who discovered America, we asking why the truth was hidden, and why uncovering it still matters today. Because this isn't just a history mystery, it's a story about power, identity, and how our past continues to shape our world. So buckle up, we're about to rewrite one of the biggest stories ever told. They taught us that Christopher Columbus, a brave Italian explorer, set sail across the Atlantic Ocean in 1492, and against all odds, he discovered America. He's been celebrated as a visionary, a symbol of courage and exploration, the man who connected two worlds. But what if that story isn't just incomplete? What if it's deliberately misleading? Let's be honest, when we hear Columbus discovered America, it sounds simple, heroic, and even poetic. But beneath that phrase lies one of the greatest distortions in human history. Because by the time Columbus's ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, landed in the Caribbean, the so-called New World was anything but new. Long before Columbus ever dreamed of setting sail, tens of millions of people were already living across the vast lands of the Americas. From the icy Arctic tundra to the lush rainforests of South America, civilizations had risen, flourished, and built incredible cities. The Maya, with their towering pyramids aligned perfectly to the stars. The Inca, who engineered cities high in the Andes Mountains without even using mortar. The Mississippian culture constructing massive earthwork cities like Cahokia near modern-day St. Louis, a metropolis that once rivaled London in size. These weren't empty lands waiting to be discovered. They were already home to sophisticated societies with deep knowledge of astronomy, agriculture, medicine, and governance. So when we say Columbus discovered America, what are we really saying? That history began only when Europe arrived? That entire civilizations didn't count until a European wrote them down? That's the uncomfortable truth behind the myth, and it's one we've been conditioned not to question. The story of Columbus wasn't just about exploration, it was about justification. In the late 15th century, European powers were hungry for land, wealth, and resources. The age of discovery was also the age of conquest. But to conquer, they needed a narrative, one that turned invasion into destiny and erasure into progress. Columbus's discovery became that narrative. It became the origin story of a new world, but told only from one side. The truth is, Columbus never even set foot on what we now call the mainland United States. His journeys took him through the Caribbean islands, parts of Central America, and the northern coast of South America, but not the continent itself. Yet somehow, his name became immortalized as the discoverer of an entire hemisphere. The reason for that? Power. After his voyages, the Catholic monarchs of Spain needed a hero, a symbol that could legitimize their claims over vast new territories. Columbus, despite his failures, his miscalculations, and even his eventual fall from grace, was turned into a legend. His story was polished, printed, and promoted as the dawn of Western civilization in the Americas. The people who were already there, tens of millions of them, were erased from the narrative, written out of the history they had created. But the cracks in that story began to appear even centuries ago. Historians noticed the contradictions, sailors questioned the roots, and indigenous oral traditions spoke of ancient encounters long before Columbus. There were Norse sagas describing voyages across icy seas, Chinese maps showing strange western coastlines, African explorers sailing vast distances on ocean currents. Each discovery whispered a truth that refused to die. Columbus didn't discover anything new. He stumbled upon something already ancient. And yet, for generations, the myth persisted. Textbooks glorified Columbus as a visionary explorer. Statues rose in his honor. A national holiday was named after him. His face appeared on currency in classrooms, even in church sermons. The myth became part of national identity, especially in countries like the United States, where discovery was tied to destiny. To question it was to question the very foundations of the story people were told about who they are. But myths have power only when we stop asking questions. And the moment we start digging, the story begins to unravel. Columbus wasn't seeking a new world, he was looking for a shortcut to Asia for spices, silk, and gold. He had no idea where he was. In his journals, he called the people he met Indians because he believed he'd reached the outskirts of India. What followed wasn't the beginning of peaceful exchange, it was the start of conquest, enslavement, and genocide. The discovery narrative transformed brutality into bravery. It reframed suffering as civilization. It took a story of invasion and sold it as a story of enlightenment. And for centuries it worked. European powers used the doctrine of discovery, a legal concept born from Columbus's voyage, to justify claiming any land not ruled by Christians. It became the moral license for colonialism, the foundation for centuries of exploitation and displacement. And here's where it gets deeper. This isn't just about history, it's about psychology. The myth of Columbus created a framework that told the Western world, we are the discoverers. We are the civilizers. We bring light to darkness. That idea shaped everything, from how education was written to how countries justified expansion, to how entire cultures were treated as invisible. But the irony is almost poetic. The so-called discovered world had been discovered thousands of years before. The people who lived there had already mapped the stars, charted the seasons, and built thriving societies. Columbus didn't find a new world, he simply entered someone else's ancient home, and yet his myth endured because it was useful. It gave Europe a hero, it gave America an origin. It turned conquest into creation. But beneath the hero's image, beneath the statues and parades, lies a far more complex truth, one that forces us to rethink what we mean when we say discovery. Because if the world was already known, already inhabited, already alive with human history, then maybe the story of Columbus isn't about discovery at all. Maybe it's about something long before Columbus's sails caught the wind of destiny. There were others who dared to cross the unknown. Mariners, wanderers, and explorers whose names were forgotten, whose journeys were buried under centuries of silence. Yet their traces, faint but undeniable, remain scattered across time. What if the Americas had already been visited by people from distant lands thousands of years before 1492? What if the first to reach this continent weren't Europeans at all? Imagine the open ocean, vast and endless, a blue wilderness separating worlds. The story we've been told insists it was impossible, that ancient people couldn't cross it. That their ships were too small, their knowledge too primitive, their courage too limited. But evidence tells a different story. Across history, human beings have always been travelers, guided not by fear, but by curiosity, by stars, by instinct. And wherever there's a horizon, there's someone who has tried to cross it. Let us start with the Vikings, the Norse seafarers whose legends tell of lands west of Greenland. Around the year 1000 CE, nearly 500 years before Columbus, a man named Leif Erikson set sail from Greenland. He was following stories his father, Eric the Red, had heard tales of a mysterious land called Vinland. And what he found was astonishing: fertile soil, forests, and rivers, a place so different from the icy landscapes he knew. For centuries, people dismissed these Norse sagas as myth. But then, in 1960, two archaeologists unearthed a site at Lonceau Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. What they discovered changed everything: remains of Norse buildings, iron nails, and tools identical to those used in Greenland and Iceland 1,000 years ago. The proof was undeniable. The Vikings had reached North America half a millennium before Columbus was even born. They had crossed the Atlantic using only wooden ships, the stars, and the wind. But here's what's even more fascinating. The Vikings might not have been the only ones. Thousands of miles across the Pacific, the Polynesians were mastering the art of ocean travel like no one else in history. Using nothing more than double-hulled canoes, celestial navigation, and the rhythm of the waves, they discovered and settled islands scattered across millions of square miles, from Hawaii to Easter Island to New Zealand. Modern sailors, using GPS and modern maps, still struggle to grasp how they achieved it. Some evidence suggests they may have gone even farther. Ancient chicken bones found in Chile bear genetic signatures identical to those of Polynesian chickens, not European ones. There are also sweet potatoes, a plant native to South America, found throughout the Pacific Islands long before Europeans arrived. How did a South American crop end up in Polynesia centuries before Columbus? The simplest explanation: contact. Either Polynesians reached South America or South Americans reached the Pacific. Either way, it means the ocean wasn't a barrier, it was a bridge. And then there's Africa, the cradle of humanity, home to some of the greatest navigators and builders the world has ever known. Ancient Egyptian inscriptions speak of voyages down the Red Sea and into the open ocean. West African empires like Mali and Songhai thrived on trade, science, and exploration. According to Arab chroniclers like Al-Umari, the emperor of Mali, Abu Bakr II, once launched a massive expedition, 200 ships, into the Atlantic around the early 1300s. He never returned, but his fleet was said to have followed the currents westward, beyond the horizon. Could they have reached the Americas? Some historians dismiss it as legend, but oceanographers point out that the Atlantic currents from West Africa flow directly toward South America and the Caribbean. Ancient maps even show strange western landmasses drawn before Columbus's voyage. And in Central America, some researchers have noted sculptures and artifacts that resemble African facial features and artistic styles. Coincidence or memory of an ancient encounter? The question remains open, but the possibility is powerful. Further east, ancient Chinese and Asian explorers also looked to the horizon. The Chinese had been building massive ocean-going ships centuries before Europe's age of exploration. There are claims that Admiral Zheng He's fleets may have reached as far as the Americas in the early 1400s, nearly 70 years before Columbus. Even if that particular claim remains debated, Chinese maps from that era depict coastlines that look strikingly similar to parts of the New World, long before Europeans supposedly discovered them. Every one of these stories, from the Norse to the Polynesians, from the Malayans to the Chinese, tells us something bigger, that humanity has always been connected. That the story of exploration doesn't belong to one nation, one continent, or one man. It's a shared legacy of human courage. And it raises a haunting question: why were these earlier voyages forgotten? Why were they erased from the narrative? Perhaps because the myth of Columbus needed to stand alone. His discovery was convenient. It marked the beginning of a European empire, a story that painted Europe as the center of the world. Acknowledging that others had come before him, that non-Europeans may have reached and interacted with the Americas, would have shattered that illusion of uniqueness, of divine destiny. Yet, fragments of truth refused to disappear. Ancient inscriptions, old maps, DNA studies, and oral histories all point to a past richer and more interconnected than we ever imagined. Some Native American tribes even have legends of foreign visitors arriving from across the seas long before Columbus, tall men with beards, strange tools, and languages unknown. Were they Vikings? Africans? Polynesians? We can't say for sure, but the echoes of those encounters still whisper through the ages. When you trace the patterns of ocean currents, when you look at how winds shift and how human ingenuity has always defied limits, the idea that people could cross oceans long before Columbus dozed an impossible, it sounds inevitable. Humanity has always been driven by the same spark: curiosity, the desire to see what lies beyond the horizon. And maybe that's the real story that's been hidden. Columbus's voyage wasn't the beginning. It was just another chapter in a much older book. One written by countless unnamed explorers, forgotten sailors, and lost civilizations who dared to dream that the world was bigger than anyone believed. Because while the myth says the world began to connect in 1492, the truth is, we had been connected long before. LSE entirely. When we talk about discovering America, it is easy to forget that the land Columbus and others stumbled upon was already alive, not just with people, but with empire cities, philosophies, and knowledge systems that rivaled and in some ways surpassed those of Europe. The Americas weren't empty, waiting to be claimed. They were full of life, innovation, and civilization. Long before European sails appeared on the horizon, this continent had its own architects, astronomers, mathematicians, and philosophers. They didn't call it the New World. To them, it was simply home. Picture the vast continent around the year 1000 CE. From the snow-covered plains of Canada to the jungles of the Amazon, societies had already built great cities and trade networks that stretched thousands of miles. The Maya, the Aztec, the Inca, the Mississippian culture, these weren't isolated tribes living in wilderness. They were nations bound together by complex political systems, engineering feats, and spiritual wisdom that stunned even the first Europeans who saw them. Let's start with the Maya, a civilization that rose in the jungles of Central America. Long before Columbus was even imagined, the Maya had charted the stars with an accuracy that modern scientists still marvel at. Their calendar could predict solar eclipses centuries in advance. Their cities like Tikal and Palenque were masterpieces of urban planning, massive pyramids, ceremonial plazas, water systems, and observatories that aligned perfectly with the movements of the planets. They didn't just watch the heavens, they understood them. And they built all this without metal tools, beasts of burden, or the wheel. Imagine what that means. Entire cities carved from limestone, temples reaching toward the sky, and written language etched into stone. The Maya weren't primitive. They were intellectuals, scientists, and artists. When Europeans were still emerging from the Dark Ages, the Maya were studying the cosmos and calculating the cycles of Venus with mathematical precision. Then came the Aztec Empire, a civilization of warriors, poets, engineers, and philosophers that rose in the Valley of Mexico. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was one of the most advanced cities in the world when Columbus was still crossing the ocean. Built on a lake, it shimmered with canals, causeways, and floating gardens, chinampas, that fed hundreds of thousands of people. Spanish conquerors who first laid eyes on it compared it to Venice, only grander. The city had aqueducts, sanitation systems, and marketplaces that bustled with trade from across Mesoamerica. Gold, obsidian, jade, feathers, and cacao flowed through its streets. But it wasn't just wealth that defined the Aztecs, it was their worldview. They saw the universe as a living, breathing force, a delicate balance of gods, nature, and humanity. Their rituals, their art, even their architecture all revolved around maintaining harmony in that cosmic order. To them, history wasn't linear. It was cyclical, birth, death, and rebirth, an eternal dance. That kind of spiritual philosophy existed long before European religions set foot on their soil. Travel south, and you'll find the Inca Empire stretching like a golden thread through the Andes Mountains, from modern-day Colombia all the way to Chile. At its height, the Inca ruled over 12 million people, linked by a vast network of roads and bridges that spanned more than 25,000 miles. Their capital, Cusco, was built in the shape of a puma, symbolizing power and balance. And then there was Machu Picchu, hidden among the clouds, a city of stone that seems to defy gravity itself. How did they do it? Without iron, without wheels, without modern tools, the Inca carved terraces into mountain slopes, harnessed the power of gravity for irrigation, and built structures so precise that even today, you can't slide a piece of paper between the stones. And yet, their genius wasn't just engineering, it was social. They developed a system of governance based on reciprocity and shared labor, the elite, ensuring that no one went hungry. They even had a form of record-keeping using knotted strings called quipus, a coded data system that historians are still trying to fully decipher. And then there were the North American civilizations, often overlooked but no less extraordinary. In the Mississippi Valley, near what's now St. Louis, stood the city of Cahokia. At its peak around 1100 CE, it was larger than London. Massive earthwork pyramids rose above plazas where tens of thousands of people gathered. Trade routes stretched across the continent, connecting the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes. The people of Cahokia studied astronomy, built complex social hierarchies, and cultivated crops that fed a thriving urban center. Farther north, the Iroquois Confederacy established one of the earliest forms of democratic governance. Their Great Law of Peace would later inspire aspects of the U.S. Constitution, a fact that's rarely taught in schools. The Haudenosaunee believed in balance between people and nature, in unity among nations, in leadership guided by wisdom rather than power. They proved that democracy and diplomacy existed in the Americas long before Europeans brought their monarchies and empires. And beyond the great cities and empires, thousands of indigenous nations thrived, each with their own languages, customs, technologies, and sacred traditions. The Navajo, the Sioux, the Cherokee, the Mapuche, the Tupi, their stories stretch across millennia, woven into the land itself. They understood the rhythms of the earth, the migration of animals, the cycles of seasons. Their survival wasn't by chance, it was by mastery. They learned to live in harmony with their environment, not dominate it. When Columbus arrived, he didn't find an empty wilderness. He entered a world that was ancient, organized, and deeply spiritual. Yet, in the European imagination, these civilizations were quickly rewritten. The Maya became mystery builders. The Aztec became bloodthirsty warriors. The Inca were called lost. The people of North America were labeled savages, words that erased their sophistication and justified what came next, conquest. But imagine for a moment if the story had been told differently. Imagine if, instead of discovering America, Columbus had been seen as a visitor to a world far older than his own. Imagine if history had recognized that Europe didn't bring civilization to the Americas, it interrupted it. Because these civilizations were already the proof that humanity had built greatness on every continent, under every sky. Their cities, their calendars, their philosophies, their architecture, all of it tells a story not of discovery, but of continuity. A story of people who looked at the stars and saw themselves reflected in them. A story that was never lost, only silenced. History, as we know it, isn't always about what happened. It's about who gets to tell the story. The tale of Columbus, discovering America, didn't just survive by chance. It was built, shaped, and protected by those who benefited from it. Behind the myth lies something far greater than one man's voyage. It's a story about power, how empires, kings, and institutions rewrote truth to control not only land, but memory itself. When Columbus returned from his first voyage in 1493, he didn't bring back gold or spices. What he brought was far more valuable to the Spanish crown, a claim. He promised Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand that he had found lands ripe for conquest, filled with souls waiting to be converted and treasures waiting to be seized. It was the perfect story for a Europe hungry for expansion. Spain had just expelled the Moors, unified under Catholic rule, and was looking for its next grand mission, one that would give it dominance over rivals like Portugal and England. Columbus's discovery became that mission. But here's where the myth began to grow. Columbus didn't actually know where he was. He thought he had reached islands off the coast of Asia, near India, hence calling the people he met Indians. Yet when his letters reached Europe, they were written with a different tone. They spoke of a new world, a world untouched, a land open for the taking. The Vatican itself, eager to support Christian monarchs and expand its influence, issued the doctrine of discovery, a papal decree that gave European Christians the right to claim any non-Christian lands they found. In a single act, the Church legalized the theft of continents. This was more than religion. It was geopolitics disguised as divine destiny. The story of discovery became a story of permission. Permission to conquer, to enslave, to rule. The lands of the Americas, already home to tens of millions, were declared terra nullius, empty land. The people who lived there were not recognized as sovereign nations, but as subjects waiting to be civilized. This language of discovery would echo for centuries, shaping how colonizers justified their actions from Africa to Asia to Oceania. The power of that story was enormous. It gave kings the moral cover they needed to invade. It gave the church a reason to convert. And it gave ordinary Europeans the illusion that they were spreading civilization rather than destruction. The idea that America was discovered by Columbus wasn't just a historical error, it was propaganda, crafted to serve the powerful. And like all propaganda, it was repeated until it became truth. As the Spanish Empire expanded, it carried Columbus's image with it, not as a flawed man, but as a chosen one. Artists painted him as a saintly figure gazing toward the heavens. Writers described him as divinely inspired, guided by God's hand to unite the world. His brutality, the enslavement, The forced conversions, the massacres was quietly edited out. In its place, a legend grew, a legend that made conquest look noble. But the manipulation didn't end with Spain. When other European powers began their own colonization, they too borrowed from the Columbus story. The British, the French, the Portuguese, they all needed their own discoverers. Men like John Cabot, Jacques Cartier, and Amerigo Vespucci were elevated into heroes. The maps of the world were redrawn, each new coastline claimed in the name of discovery. And so the narrative evolved not just as history, but as identity. To discover meant to conquer meant to civilize, and to civilize meant to rule. Even centuries later, the myth served political power. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as the United States grew, Columbus was reborn, this time not as a Spanish explorer, but as a symbol of American destiny. The new nation needed its own origin story, something that predated British colonization and tied its identity to a noble quest for freedom. Columbus became that figure. He was reinvented as the man who brought the world together, a hero who embodied courage, exploration, and faith. Never mind that his voyage had nothing to do with the future United States. The myth fit the message. By the late 1800s, statues of Columbus were rising in cities across America. His name was given to towns, schools, even the nation's capital district, Washington, D.C., also known as the District of Columbia. The Italian-American community later embraced him as a cultural icon, celebrating Columbus Day as a symbol of pride and acceptance in a country that once discriminated against them. The myth had become so powerful that it could serve anyone, kings, priests, or immigrants, depending on how it was told. But behind every version of the story was the same unspoken truth, that history is written by those in control. The voices of indigenous peoples, the civilizations that had thrived for millennia, were silenced. Their books were burned, their languages outlawed, their knowledge dismissed as superstition. European scholars studied their ruins and called them mysteries, refusing to believe that native people could have built such wonders. The rewriting wasn't just political, it was psychological. It created a world where Europe was always the beginning and everyone else was the background. The deeper you dig, the more you realize that this wasn't an accident. The myth of Columbus was a tool, a foundation upon which empires justified their existence. By declaring discovery, they declared ownership. By declaring ownership, they erased humanity. The Americas became not lands with history, but blank pages to be written on. And those who questioned that narrative were labeled heretics, rebels, or fools. Even modern education inherited that bias. For generations, schoolchildren learned a simplified version of events. Columbus sailed across the ocean, proved the world was round, and discovered America. It's a story that fits neatly into a textbook but leaves out the blood, the suffering, the complexity. It's a story that makes history feel heroic instead of tragic. And that's exactly how power sustains itself, not just through armies and flags, but through stories that tell us who we are supposed to admire and who we are supposed to forget. The myth of discovery, therefore, was never really about geography. It was about ideology. It was about creating a world order where Europe stood at the center and everyone else revolved around it, where lands could be taken because they were found and where lives could be destroyed because they were deemed less civilized. It was about turning conquest into creation, theft into exploration, genocide into glory. And even today, echoes of that myth linger. Every time a history book begins with Columbus, every time a national holiday celebrates his voyage without question, we're still living under the shadow of that political construction. Because the story we tell about discovery isn't just about the past. It shapes how we see the world now. Who gets credit, who gets erased, and who gets to decide what history means. For centuries, the story of who discovered America seemed settled. Columbus sailed. The world changed and history began anew, but today that story is unraveling. Not because of speculation or myth, but because modern science, archaeology, and technology are finally revealing what the old history books never could. Each new discovery paints a more complex, more interconnected picture of our past. One that proves the Americas were not a blank canvas waiting to be found, but part of a thriving global web long before Columbus's ships ever left Spain. It begins with the earth itself, the soil, the stones, and the ancient ruins buried beneath forests and deserts. In recent years, archaeologists using LiDAR technology, a kind of aerial laser scanning that can see through dense jungle, have uncovered massive ancient cities hidden under the canopy of Central and South America. What they found has rewritten everything we thought we knew about pre-Columbian civilizations. In Guatemala, near the site of Tikal, LIDAR revealed more than 60,000 previously unknown structures, roads, fortresses, homes, and temples, stretching across hundreds of square miles. It wasn't just a city, it was an empire. The Maya weren't scattered tribes. They were an organized civilization with highways, water systems, and complex urban planning. And the discoveries don't stop there. Deep in the Amazon rainforest, new evidence shows that ancient people built vast networks of settlements, fish ponds, and geometric earthworks, massive patterns etched into the soil that can only be seen from above. For centuries, explorers called the Amazon a green desert, claiming it was too wild to sustain civilization. But new data tells a different story, that millions once lived there, cultivating crops, building cities, and transforming the landscape in ways we're only beginning to understand. Even DNA, the blueprint of humanity, is telling us stories our ancestors forgot to record. Genetic studies of indigenous populations have revealed connections that span oceans. Certain genetic markers found in South America have close similarities to groups from the South Pacific, suggesting ancient contact between Polynesians and Native Americans long before Columbus. In fact, researchers recently discovered that some Polynesian people share DNA segments with indigenous groups from Ecuador, proof that these two worlds met at least 800 years before 1492. The Pacific Ocean, once seen as an impassable barrier, now looks more like a bridge. Then there are the artifacts, small clues that hint at ancient global exchange. Ancient coins from Carthage found in North America. Traces of cocaine and nicotine, plants native to the Americas, discovered in Egyptian mummies. Stone carvings in Mexico that resemble African and Asian figures. Mainstream historians often argue these are coincidences, but as evidence grows, the coincidences begin to form a pattern, one that suggests the ancient world was far more connected than we were ever taught to believe. Modern oceanography has added its own voice to this story. Scientists studying Atlantic currents have confirmed that it's entirely possible for small, ancient vessels, even without modern navigation, to cross the ocean using natural wind and water patterns. The same currents that carried Columbus westward could have carried Africans, Phoenicians, or even ancient Mediterranean sailors centuries earlier. And when you combine that with the incredible navigational skills of Pacific voyagers, the idea of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact no longer sounds like fantasy. Linguists, too, are uncovering traces of contact that were hiding in plain sight. Some indigenous American languages contain words and phonetic patterns strikingly similar to those found in distant parts of the world. In the Pacific Northwest, for instance, certain words share roots with Asian dialects. In South America, there are echoes of Polynesian and Austronesian language structures. While these similarities alone don't prove direct contact, they raise compelling questions about migration, influence, and exchange that history has long ignored. And what about technology? One of the most fascinating aspects of these discoveries is how ancient American inventions predate or parallel those from other parts of the world. The Inca's Kepu system, a method of recording information with knots and chords, mirrors binary coding logic used in computers today. The Maya calendar was more precise than the Gregorian one Europe adopted centuries later. The engineering techniques used to build Machu Picchu, where massive stones were shaped and fitted without mortar, still baffle modern architects. These were not isolated miracles. They were signs of a world in conversation with itself, even if that conversation has been forgotten. But modern discoveries are also forcing us to confront something deeper. Not just that others may have reached the Americas first, but that the very idea of discovery is flawed. The more we uncover, the clearer it becomes that ancient peoples across the globe were explorers by nature. They didn't see the world as divided by oceans or continents. They saw it as one living system where movement, trade, and knowledge flowed freely. The myth of Columbus thrives on the illusion of separation, that before 1492 the world was disconnected. Science now shows the opposite. Humanity has always been connected. Even the tools of modern archaeology are reshaping how we see these ancient interactions. Satellite imaging, carbon dating, and underwater exploration have revealed sunken ruins and ancient harbors along coastlines that would have been active long before. European voyages off the coast of Cuba, divers have found what appear to be massive stone structures more than 600 feet below the surface, possibly remnants of an ancient city submerged when sea levels rose thousands of years ago. Could these ruins belong to a civilization that traveled far across the Atlantic? The evidence is still debated, but it opens the door to possibilities that challenge the entire framework of history as we know it. And yet, as these discoveries emerge, they face resistance. Changing history isn't just about science, it's about challenging belief. The narrative of Columbus as the heroic discoverer is deeply rooted in Western identity. To accept that others may have come before him, Africans, Asians, Polynesians, or indigenous explorers themselves, means rewriting the story of civilization itself. It means admitting that the Western world wasn't the beginning of global history, but merely one of its many chapters. But the truth is no longer easy to hide. The evidence keeps growing, layer by layer, artifact by artifact, until the myth begins to collapse under its own weight. The more we look, the more we find that humanity's greatest journeys didn't start with Columbus. They started long before, in countless directions led by countless forgotten explorers. Modern technology is giving voice to the silent witnesses of history, the ruins, the bones, the languages, and the genes. It's connecting the dots that were deliberately left unconnected for centuries. And as the pieces come together, a new vision of the past begins to emerge, one where the Americas were never discovered by anyone, because they were always part of a global human story that began not in 1492, but at the dawn of civilization itself. When we talk about who discovered America, it might sound like a question buried in the past, a debate for historians, a footnote in a textbook, but it's not just about history. It's about identity, justice, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Because the myth of discovery isn't just an old lie, it's a living one. It's woven into the foundation of how nations see themselves, how cultures define their worth, and how generations understand the world they live in. The reason this story still matters is because history is never really over. Every myth we inherit shapes our reality. When we were taught that Columbus discovered America, we weren't just learning a date or a name. We were learning a hierarchy, a way of seeing the world that placed Europe at the center and everyone else at the edges. We were told that progress began when Europe arrived, that civilization was brought here, not already here. And whether we realize it or not, that idea still echoes in the way societies function today. Think about it. When a nation celebrates Columbus Day, it's not just remembering an explorer, it's reaffirming a worldview. It's saying that the birth of the modern world began with conquest, not coexistence. It celebrates the moment the old world collided with the new, but not the cost of that collision. Millions of indigenous people died in the centuries that followed, from violence, enslavement, and disease. Cultures were erased, languages lost, entire ways of life destroyed. And yet, for hundreds of years, that suffering was treated as the price of progress. That's the danger of the discovery myth. It hides pain behind pride. But this isn't just about guilt or blame. It's about understanding the deep roots of inequality that still exist today. When the story of America begins with discovery, it erases what came before: the thriving civilizations, the ancient knowledge, the indigenous sovereignty. And when those roots are erased, it becomes easier to dismiss indigenous struggles in the present. Land rights, cultural preservation, even representation, they all trace back to that moment when one version of history declared itself the only truth. Across the Americas, indigenous people are still fighting to reclaim what was taken, not just land, but identity. To be seen not as relics of the past, but as living nations with languages, traditions, and voices that matter. Every time the old discovery story is told, it reinforces the idea that they came after history, not before it. And that's why challenging the myth is so important. Because telling the truth about the past doesn't destroy history, it restores it. There's another reason it still matters. The story of Columbus didn't just shape how we see the past. It shaped how we define heroism, power, and success. We've built monuments to conquerors and explorers, but not to the cultures they conquered. We celebrate the act of discovery more than the wisdom of those who were already discovered. That mindset didn't end with Columbus. It became the foundation for centuries of expansion, colonization, and exploitation. It's the same logic that fueled Manifest Destiny, the scramble for Africa, and the domination of indigenous lands across the globe. It's the same narrative that told the world that conquest equals progress, and that erasure is a necessary part of civilization. And yet, the cracks are showing. More and more people are beginning to question the stories they were taught. Cities across the United States have begun replacing Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day, not as an act of destruction, but of restoration. Statues are coming down. Museums are rewriting their plaques. Schools are beginning to teach that history isn't just the story of the victors, but of the survivors. It's slow, it's messy, and it's controversial, but it's progress. When you understand that America wasn't discovered, you start to see the world differently. You start to realize that the idea of discovery itself is flawed, because you can discover a place where people already live. What Columbus did wasn't discovery. It was contact, and that contact came with consequences that still ripple through the centuries. The diseases that decimated populations, the forced conversions, the enslavement, the theft of land, those weren't side effects. They were part of the system built on the myth of discovery. But there's also something deeply hopeful in confronting this truth. Because once you strip away the myth, you uncover something far richer, a story of resilience. Despite everything, indigenous cultures endure, their languages are being revived, their spiritual traditions are being practiced again. Their stories, once silenced, are being told with new strength. And as we learn to listen to those voices, we begin to understand that the real history of America isn't one of discovery, it's one of survival, adaptation, and continuity. Why does this still matter today? Because every generation inherits a version of the past. And if that version is built on half-truths, it limits what we can imagine for the future. When we teach children that Columbus discovered America, we teach them that history begins when someone powerful says it does. But when we teach them the truth, that America was already a land of civilizations, of people, of wisdom, we teach them to value every culture, every voice, every story. We teach them that history isn't owned by empires, but shared by humanity. This also matters because the same logic that once justified conquest still shapes global politics. The idea that powerful nations can take what they want, that wealth and dominance are the marks of civilization. That mentality didn't vanish with the colonial era. It evolved. It hides behind words like progress, globalization, and development. It's the same story, told in modern language. And it began with a voyage across the Atlantic, wrapped in the illusion of discovery. But perhaps the most powerful reason this story still matters is that it reminds us how fragile truth can be. One narrative, repeated long enough, can become a nation's foundation. And yet, truth, even buried for centuries, always finds a way to rise. Every new archaeological discovery, every indigenous scholar, every re-examined document chips away at the lie. Bit by bit, the world is beginning to remember what was forgotten. The untold story of who discovered America isn't just about rewriting the past, it's about reclaiming the future. It's about shifting from a history of domination to a history of understanding. It's about realizing that discovery isn't the moment one person arrives. It's the moment humanity remembers what it once forgot, that we were always connected, long before Columbus drew his first map and long before history chose who to remember and who to erase. So, after peeling back centuries of myth, misunderstanding, and manipulation, what do we really find beneath the legend of Columbus and the so-called discovery of America? We find that history was never a single story. It was always a chorus of voices. Some were silenced, some forgotten, and some buried under the weight of empire. But together they tell a truth that's far more complex, far more human, and far more inspiring than the simple tale we were taught. America was not discovered. It was remembered by the world, again and again. By the Vikings who braved icy seas, by ancient African and Asian navigators who may have touched its shores, and most of all, by the indigenous peoples who had always called it home. Long before Columbus, they mapped the stars, built great cities, cultivated the land, and carried stories that stretched across millennia. They didn't need discovery, they were already living the history that the world would one day rediscover. What modern science, archaeology, and truth-telling have given us is not just new information, it's perspective. It shows us that history is not static, it evolves as we evolve. Every time we challenge an old narrative, we come closer to understanding ourselves. Every time we listen to a voice that was silenced, we bring balance to the story of humanity. The question of who discovered America was never just about geography, it was about power. But now, we have the chance to reclaim that power, not through conquest, but through truth. To honor the explorers of every kind, those who sailed across oceans, those who built empires of knowledge in forests and mountains, and those who preserved wisdom when the world tried to erase it. Why does it still matter? Because the story of discovery isn't really about the past. It's about who we choose to be now. Will we keep repeating the same myths, or will we finally tell the story as it truly happened, diverse, connected, and human? The untold story of who discovered America reminds us that no civilization stands alone. No culture is born from nothing, and no land can ever truly be discovered if it was already alive with voices, dreams, and memories. In the end, history doesn't belong to the victors. It belongs to all of us, to those who remember, to those who question, and to those brave enough to seek the truth beneath the legend.